arithmetic operations happen in Python, right? Now the basic difference in PyCharm and in ideally was that in ideally what we did was we just wrote 2 plus 3 and we pressed enter and it gave us the result as 5, right? But what happens in PyCharm is that these are the integer values, right? You have to store these integer values in certain variables. So what I'll do is that I'll just briefly give a variable, let's say a, and I'll store a value, let's say 2 in this one. So what is happening here is that a is our variable, right? So a variable, what is a variable? So a variable is a number or a character in Python that stores a particular value and it compares it. So how does it store it? You give the equal to sign. That basically, this is an operator that says you are giving a particular value to a variable. So whatever on the LHS side of equal to is your variable, that is a here, and whatever you have written on the RHS side of your equal to is the value that that variable will be storing here, right? So here we have given a variable name a and it stores the value 2, right? I can write another variable b and I can give it a value, let's say 3, right? Now there are two ways you can run this function. Either you can just write another variable, let's say c, and you can write c will be equal to a plus b. Either you can do in that way, that is you are giving another variable c, and in that variable c you are storing the value a plus b, that is whatever the value a has and whatever the value b has, we have to add both of them together, and whatever value a plus b will give us, that value will be stored in the variable c, and then you will print it, right? One way to do is this way. Another way is that you can just directly print and write a plus b. Now keep this thing here in mind. When we were writing print hello world, what we were doing is that we were, whatever thing that we wanted to print, we kept it in double quotes. So keep this thing in mind. This double quotes, whatever you are writing and in between the double quotes, that is not accepted as a command, but it is just accepted as a string of letters, right? So Python won't understand that you, so if you write print in this way, Python will just return you a plus b. It won't give you the value 5 because you have added a plus b, you have written a plus b in double quotes. So according to Python language, it recognizes it as a length of characters or a string of characters rather than values. But if you want to write the value, you want Python to print what is the addition of a plus b, then you don't have to write a plus b in double quotes. You will just give an argument to print saying print a plus b. And then you just run it and it will give you the answer 5, right? So that is the like basic difference between what you write in double quotes and what you write in single quotes, right? Now another, so this one was easy, it was like an addition. You can similarly you can do a subtraction as well. Just write 3 here and like 1 here and just say a minus b, and then you run it, it will give you the answer 2. 3 minus 1 is 2. If you can just like, let's say here I do 2 and I do a star b, which is for multiplication, and I run it, it will give me the answer 6, 3 to the 6. Now let's say if I want to divide something, so let's say I give it a value 8 and here I give it, let's say 4, and I divide a by b, so I will get 2.0. Now can anyone tell me why I have got 2.0 here? Because in addition, subtraction and multiplication, it was just giving me the value of the integer, right? It was giving me 6, or it was giving me 2, it was giving me 1. It was not giving me 1.0 or 2.0 or 6.0. But here when we have done the division, it is giving me 2.0. Can anyone tell me why it is that? No one? Okay, so what happens is you might be aware that slash is basically a symbol for division, right? So what happens in Python is that when you do a division of any kind of integer value, right? So what happens here is that when you divide 8 by 4, we in normal kind of division, we know that when 8 is divided by 4, it will give a value of 2 because it is completely divisible by 4. So we will get the value 2. But what happens in Python, is that there are certain times when there are not completely divisible by any kind of number. Let's say if you divide 5 by 2, you will get 2.5, right? So in that sense, if Python starts giving you a number without adding a decimal here, then what happens is, in cases where you write 8 and 4, and when you divide a number which is completely divisible, then it is okay for you. It will give you 2. But what happens if you divide 5 by 2? It will, you know, the answer is 2.5, but Python will just give you 2, and that is not the correct answer, right? So that's why Python inherently by default, it gives you whatever division you do, Python will always give you a division in the form of a decimal, and this is also known as a float point number or floating integers, right? So this is an inbuilt function of Python. So whatever you do, it will give you. For example, like I write 5 here and 2 here. I know the answer is 2.5. So if I run it, the answer will the Python that will give me answer is 2.5, because Python recognizes the default value as the float point integer, right? But what if you don't want zero point 0.5, you just want 2? So for that, what you guys have to do is that you guys just have to add another slash here, and this is known as an integer division or floor division. And when you do this, you'll see it won't give you the decimal answer. It will just give you 2. That is 5 divided by 2 is 2. It won't give you the number which is in decimal. So this is the basic difference between a single slash division and a double slash division. So single slash division is basically an floating division or a general division, whereas a double slash division is basically an integer division or a floor division, whereby you don't want anything which is after decimal. That means you, whatever result that you will get will be an integer value, right? So I'll just quickly briefly give you an understanding of what an integer and a float is. So let's say if I write a equals to 5, so this is, okay, I'll just quickly ask you guys one question. If I say a equals to 5, b equals to 5.0, and what is a, like which one of these, a or b, is integer and which one is float?
A is integer and B is float.
Right. Because in floating point, always remember that whenever a number is in floating point, it will always have a decimal associated with it. So that's how you recognize whether a number is an integer or a floating point, right? And let's say if I give another variable c and I store a value in it, let's say any name, right? Let's say I write Raj. So what is this? Is it a float point or it is an integer?
It's going to be a float because integer is only whole values.
So this is also a whole value, R, A, and J. So basically, it's neither an integer nor a floating point. It's a string, right? So whatever you write in the form of characters or alphabets, whether be it a name of a person, place, address, whatever it is, when you are using something in double quotes in the form of alphabetical characters, that automatically gets converted into a string, right? So that is the basic difference, how you would like visually identify whether something is integer, float, or a string. So if it's just a single number, it's an integer. If it has decimal with it, it's a floating point. And if it is a character, a length of characters, alphabetical words, then it becomes a string, right? So everything is clear up until now. Does anyone have any doubt?
No, sir.
Okay. So we'll quickly just progress further here. So now what happens is, next we will be studying about Python identifiers. So everyone is able to see the presentation screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll study about what Python identifiers is. So identifier, as the name suggests, that is something that you use to identify something, right? For example, if I ask you about a person, so you identify that person based on certain characteristic. like their height or like their eye color or hair color or body structure, whatever it is. There are n number of identifiers that you can use to identify something. In the same way, Python also use certain kind of identifiers to identify a character or a particular integer value, let's say, or a number, whatever it is, right? So there are different kind of identifiers, and these are known as like variables. And just as we saw, whatever we are writing on the left hand side of equal to sign is a variable, and the basic definition of variable is something that stores a particular value. It will point to a particular value. That is what is known as a variable. I'll quickly tell you about what module is, but before going to module, I'll tell you about what functions is. So what happens in when once you are learning the basics of Python, you won't be facing functions. But once you learn the basics of Python and then you go on to do much complex programming, be it with genomics or transcriptomics, you can't write something which is repeatable on every line. So for that, what's easy way to do is that you create a function, just like in mathematics. You, for example, let's say you have a straight line equation, right? Y equals to mx plus c. So you know what y will give you. Y will always give you a slope, which is multiplied with the x variable and then y intercept. So that is what the y function will give you. In the same way, in Python identifier, a function is something that will give you something, or a function has an argument which will provide you something. We'll also discuss this in detail once we go. Just like keep this thing in basic thing in mind, what functions are. Next thing is object. So object is something which you give to a class variable. So, and what classes are. So basically what happens is, in Python, there are certain things that are done in a structured way. First, you have to write a class, then you go for a function, and then you go for whatever kind of loops that you want to do. So a class will store all the objects, right? So that's how class will store all the objects. In objects, there will be functions which will give you the particular result. In functions, there will be variables which will be storing a corresponding value. And all of these together will constitute what is known as a module, which we come in Python. And we will be discussing each and every one of them as we go on along. Now, there is one more thing that you have to keep in mind is what is called as the reserved words. Now, as you saw, when we are adding two words, just wrote the variable as A or B or C. But there are certain words that user can't give to Python because those words are already pre-installed in Python. So Python won't understand whether that thing came from a user or was it from an inbuilt function. So there are certain words that you can't give as a variable name. For example, in these words are like and, exec, not, assert, finally, or break for. So these are all the inbuilt letters or inbuilt words that the user can't use. If you use it, you will see that it is inbuilt function that Python has. You can't give it as a user defined input, right? So you don't have to learn all this thing. Once you start doing the Python programming, you'll understand what these things stands for, right? Next thing is the naming conventions that are there in Python identifier. How would you give the conventions in naming? So whatever class name that you have, the class name will always start with an uppercase letter, and all the other identifiers that we have, like functions or modules, these will all start with a lowercase letters. The second thing is that once you start an identifier, you can start an identifier with an underscore. So for example, what I can do here is that, let's say I'm writing a class. So how to write a class? You can just type class. So you see, if I want to give class or if I want to name a variable as class, I can't do that because as soon as I wrote class, the color of class changed. And that says to me that class is an inbuilt function of Python, so I can't use it. Now, what underscore means is that you can start a class and you can give any name. Let's say I write Apple, right? So Apple is my class. And so the very first rule is that the class will always start with an uppercase letter. And if you can, the second rule is that you can start your class with an underscore. Now, once you start a class with an underscore, what this means is that you are privatizing your class. Now, what privatization here means is that when you upload your codes somewhere on the website or somewhere else, people won't be able to see this particular code because you have privatized it, right? Some aspect of it might be visible to them, but not everything of it. But let's say you can start your class with a double underscore. What double underscore stands for is that you have totally or strictly privatized your class function. So nobody can see this function until and unless you give them an access to this one. And this is really important because it is here where the major like plagiarism thing happens between people. So that's why people like try to class everything what they do. They try to keep it in a class so that and privatize it so that it becomes independent, so that it becomes dependent on that particular person. It won't be available publicly. So in that way you can protect your code from any kind of plagiarism, right? And and the third point states the same thing. You can start with the two leading underscores, and sometimes you can also end a particular class at in double scores. So like apple and underscore underscore apple underscore underscore. What this means is that now that you have created, okay, cool. I'll quickly wrap it up. So we will discuss about what these Python interpreters and lines are. Here I will just discussing about lines and indentations more like quickly. So there are certain kind of indentations that you have to follow. Like for example, if I write if and I write true. So you guys don't have to understand what this means right now. We'll be discussing it about further. And if I write just say print and I write let's say true. So what happens here is that when you run this code, it will show me an error. It will show me a syntax error. And that's because print, because you are asking the Python to print something. So you have to keep those things in parentheses in the indentation here, right? So once you do that, then if you print your function, the function will print it as it is, true. So, and but here you don't have to write, although in some cases you might see that you have a parenthesis here as well. But if you don't write the parenthesis here, it doesn't matter, because true is inbuilt function of Python. So it won't ask you to give any parentheses there, but you have to give a parenthesis in print function. So that is how you start all the indentations, line indentations. We'll be discussing each one of them as we go along the slides. This is just an overview structures. About the quotations in Python is the same thing. Whether you write anything in a single quotation or a double quotation, Python doesn't discriminate in between those. But if you write in a triple quotation, that is something what you write in the form of a paragraph, right? So whatever, and triple quotation is something that you guys should follow, and I'll like recommend you guys to do that, because what happens is sometimes when you write the code, you have to know what your codes are doing. So the best way to do it is that you can just write triple quotes, and whatever you write here, this will be involved in your triple quotes, and the Python interpreter won't recognize this as a code, so it won't run this. And but it will be good on your side to do this, because let's say 2 or 3 days after you run some codes, you will be knowing what your codes were doing. So this is a good way to do this. I would like personally recommend you guys to start doing this type of behavior in while doing a programming thing, right? And the same way is to do commenting. So let's say if you have written a particular value, let's say if I'm writing print let's say a, but I don't want my Python to print this particular function. So what I can do is you can just write a hashtag here. What this hashtag will do is that it will comment out this particular line. That means Python won't recognize this line as a code and it won't run it, right? So this is also a very good way to understand it. So like if you're writing this particular programming as print, what you can do is you can just write a comment word hashtag, and you will write print does the printing of words. So just for you guys to know what print function is doing. So in this way you guys can comment out your codes as well. So this is a good like tactic to do. And